everyone. My name is Joanne Loy. I'm an architect and the content marketing manager here at Monograph. I'm excited to welcome Ray Barn and Tim Smith from Archibiz. Ray and Tim are going to be talking to us about the 5 must-haves to lead a successful architecture practice, along with strategies that will help you become a more effective leader.
Good morning. Well, good evening. Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation at Section Cut. I hope everybody's enjoying the day 1 and day 2 in the sessions. But Ray and I are excited to share with you the 5 rights of managing and leading people. Before we begin, let me just quickly introduce Ray. Ray's built and sold a number of his own businesses. He's mentored many CEOs and has spent the last 16 years coaching and mentoring businesses just like yours to help them achieve sustainable business success.
Thanks, Tim. If I could introduce my colleague, Tim. He's operated his own business and he's run a number of creative studios around the world, actually. And his aim has been to help drive growth and profitability in these studios. So, Archibiz, we're all about simplifying business for architects. And people come to us when they feel they've got a gap in their business knowledge. We all know that architectural universities, they're not particularly good at teaching about business. We feel that Archibiz is filling that gap and addressing some of the frustrations that people feel in the progress of their practices. What we've discerned is that architects are looking for 3 certainties. The absence of certainty causes so much frustration in architectural practice. And when you get right down to it, the 3 things that architects are looking for are certainty of work coming through the door at the right time, at the right price, from the right people. Certainty of income, so get rid of the cash flow problems that you have and the month-by-month worries about money in the bank. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly for architects, is the impact on the built environment. You want to be proud of something that you build, and if you get these 3 certainties, then you've got what you need in your practice. So this diagram here just explains what would happen in an ideal world and what actually happens in reality. So everyone's looking for sustainable success. That success really should come from specializing, so knowing who you are, what you're good at, where you fit in the market, getting a really good system that works well with delivering that product, and then scaling that on a really solid foundation. But unfortunately, what we find, not only in architectural businesses, but in all businesses, is that people specialize and then they scale, and then they find that they've got to retrofit the systems and processes. So our job at Archibiz is to provide a lot of those systems and processes easy to use. Business is not difficult if someone teaches you the rules, and that's what Archibiz is all about. Tim, please take it through the 5 rights of managing and leading people.
Thanks, Ray. That's right. So the 5 rights of managing and leading people, that's what we're here to chat with you about today. There are 5 rights, and there's 5, it actually seems to be quite a few, but let's get into it, and I'm sure you'll keep up. So the first right is about the right people, which is about getting the right team in your practice. The second right that we'll talk about is the right structure. That's really about structural thinking in your practice. The structure is important, but the thinking around that structure is equally important. The third is the right work, which means doing the right things. The 4th right is the right way, which is doing the right things right. And the 5th right is the right time, so doing the right amount of the right things right. And that's really about time management. So I'm going to pass back to Ray. We're going to take a couple of these rights each, and we'll see you at the end.
Thank you, Tim. And don't get confused by all those rights. It really is a simple process around people, structure, making sure people do the right things, making sure they do the right things properly, and then thinking about time management, how you split time within your practice. So let's just start with looking at the people. So the right people is the first question, and there's a really good book which I would encourage all of you to look at, which is Jim Collins' Good to Great. And one of his encouragements is to get the right people on the bus. And it's really hard to decide what you're going to do, what you're capable of doing if you don't have those right people. So first encouragement is to make sure that you've got the right people on the bus. We know that it's a really tight market. We watched a little bit of the previous session, and you really need to be clear on who you're getting into your practice and making your practice really attractive to those people. It can be a tight market. Sometimes it's a feeling of who's interviewing who. The client, the candidate comes to you and they're asking you all the questions. And the key things for us that we find is it's not always about money. It's about things like purpose. What makes you different? Why would someone want to come and work for you? Get really clear on that. Second point is vision. Where is your practice going? And we're amazed how often we meet architectural practices, we speak to staff, and there's really no feeling in the business of direction or purpose or where it's going. And because no one's taken the time to really think about that. And then the last piece is your culture. What is the culture? What values do you live by as a practice? And how do you communicate those to people who may come and work for you? And the culture is really all about how you behave as a practice. So when it comes to people, forecasting is absolutely key in an architectural practice. And we find that too many practices, again, without being too critical, they operate what we call the get busy, get help strategy. And that is the way to get the work. And then they get the people in, they work their way through that. And that has some real problems in it because people wait too long before they employ the people they need. And what that means is you tend to hire the wrong people, you don't have time for training, and you really don't have time to fit people into that culture and purpose and induction that we spoke about a little bit earlier. And the key to this is knowing how much work you've got on your books. Again, we're amazed how many architects can't tell us, what's your work in progress? How much signed up work have you got over the next few months? And what's the phasing of that work? And I know that it's difficult to forecast. Every business is difficult to forecast. But you really need to work out what is the uninvoiced portion of all the project fees that you've got on the books at the moment. That's your work in progress. Now, next encouragement here is get to your nose quickly. And what we mean by this is that we've all hired the wrong people in our careers, and we know it's not going to work out. We know it just doesn't feel right. This person either doesn't have the skills we thought they had, or their personality is a little bit jarring within the practice. So the encouragement is don't wait too long. Don't wait too long with the wrong people. Don't persevere with the wrong people for too long. The next piece is we encourage people to think like a distribution company. Now, a distribution company, as you can see here, has got lots of vans, and a business starts off with one van, that van gets full, and then you expand and get some additional vehicles. And building an architectural practice is exactly the same. And it drives two key questions in a distribution company. What's the next vehicle we're going to get? Is it a big van or a small van? Is it two vans of the same type that we have? And an architectural practice is exactly the same. You can plan in advance who your next hire is. Don't leave it till the last minute. Prepare your job description, prepare your advertisements, get ready. And the key is to have the two key questions answered, which is who's your next hire? And you don't always have to go ahead with exactly that hire, but have in your mind who's your next hire and what is the trigger to get that next hire? Absolutely two key questions when it comes to people. And this, moving up to the first division, this is really about how you think about your improvement in your practice. And it's really easy to get into the mindset of everything's broken and we need to fix stuff. And we really say to people, no, think everything you've done up to now has been perfect. If there was a better way to do it, you would have done it. So think of it like you won the second division. You need to celebrate. You've finished at the top of the league. But the very next thought is we're now in the first division. What does that actually mean? How do we strengthen our team to cope and survive in the Premier Division or the First Division? So the key takeouts about right people: you need to be attractive to new employees as well as to your clients. Think about your next employee. Get to your nose quickly. So if you've got the wrong people, get them off the bus. I know it sounds harsh, but the wrong people can hold back your practice. And finally, prepare for your next employee. So just an example, we had a client in Sydney, Sharif, and they employed a practice manager. That was they realized that that's who they needed. They prepared the job description, and they got Bronwyn into the practice and absolutely transformed that business and gave them all. She wasn't an architect, but she brought skills to that business that led to better organization, better profit, and probably most importantly, better outcomes for clients.
Thanks, Ray. So that's our first right, the right people, and now we're just going to address the right structure in your business. And the right structure is really about structural thinking for an architectural practice. And this is our business structure diagram that I'm just going to quickly walk you through. Typically, two or more people start a business and they put in some money, and those initial people are the shareholders or the investors in the business. And it doesn't matter how large or how small the business is, whether it's Tesla or Gensler or Brian's architectural practice down the road, they become the shareholders, and that is the first hat you wear as a business owner, that of the shareholder. The shareholders don't obviously run the business. They appoint a board and a board of directors. And that's really, when we talk about a board, we're not talking about a oak paneled room or high back chairs or people with grey hair like Ray. Really, it's the board is all about board thinking and a group of people who are really responsible for risk and compliance and vision, etc., but are key and instrumental in running the company. And that's the second hat you wear as a owner, that of the board director. The board don't run the business on a day-to-day basis. They appoint a CEO to do that. The CEO is the head of the operation, is an employee along with the rest of the team, and that is actually the third hat that you wear. So there's three hats. There's the hat of the shareholder, the director, and the employee. And it's really important to remember those different hats and which one you're wearing at each time. Now, something's missing from this diagram, and often when we present it, the first thing that people say that's missing is clients. And that's correct. We obviously all need clients in order to run a successful practice or a practice at all. But something else is missing, and we need to ask the question, who do those clients contract with? They don't have a contract directly with the board or with the CEO. They contract with the business. So the business is a separate entity from the roles or from the people, if you like. And the three hats that I mentioned, those three roles, all have a different relationship with the business. The shareholders own the business. The board or the board of directors, they look after the business in more of a custodial role, and the employees, they work for the business. It may seem obvious, but business owners get confused about these roles and have the wrong conversation wearing the wrong hat. There's two really important things to take away from this diagram quickly before we move on. And the first is the value of the board, and this is where the board thinking takes place. And this is where Archibiz, or you as a business owner, can have a real impact on your business. And secondly, making the distinction that the business is a separate entity in its own right. For some people, we've found that separating themselves from the business has made a massive impact. And Jean Graham from Winter Architecture here in Australia, she said that yellow box changed my life. And what she meant by that really was that it relieved a huge amount of stress for her and weight off her shoulders, knowing that she didn't have to carry the whole business herself. And that the business was a separate entity in its own right. And as a board director or an employee, she was actually separate from it. So this is a great thing for business owners to realize and to understand. And the burden of responsibility and allowing you to actually sleep at night can be obviously hugely beneficial. It's also really important to remember that the strategy for the practice lives at a board level. This is where the strategic thinking for the business should take place. Regular time can be set aside each month to work on the business, We're probably all familiar with the now well-known saying of working on the business rather than in the business. And it's at the board level where that thinking takes place, and we really can get to work on the business. The strategy is created at the board level, but it really rests with the business. The vision for the practice is the vision for the business, not the vision for the CEO or the owner. And this is what we mean by moving from they to we, or moving from a they business to a we business. When we speak to employees, which we do quite often, and we ask them about the practice and its vision and where they're going, commonly we hear the answers that they want to grow the practice, or it's up to them, meaning the owners. But what we really encourage when we ask this question is that employees respond with a we. Well, we encourage it, but I guess that's where the business really wants to get to. We want to hear them say, we are developing new markets, or we are going to open a new studio. Employees should see themselves as part of the team, part of the business, and tied to the vision of that practice. Wearing headphones is actually quite a classic example, and it does reflect on this and on the business's culture. When a new employee starts in the business, they look around and they pick up social cues and they talk to people and they try to figure out what's okay and not okay around here. They might ask a colleague if it's okay to wear headphones in the studio. And in a they business, they might hear the answer, they don't like them, meaning the owners don't like the headphones, so we don't wear them. But in a we business, you might hear the response, we don't wear them, meaning we've made a decision, or as a team, we've decided that we don't wear them. Understanding and achieving this shift in the team's view has a big impact on the structural thinking for the practice and where the team sees themselves in it. The last point I wanted to make about the right structure before we move on is the importance of being clear on the current structure in the business and the future structure in the business. So having a plan for knowing what it looks like now and having a plan for what it looks like in the future. This enables owners to be clear on roles and opportunities available for their team, and also helps employees visualize their path forward within the practice. So the key takeouts for the right structure. Structure is more important than ownership, which is really about the structural thinking. Build a well-structured team rather than an owner and some helpers, and understand the value of the board within that structure. And a quick example from me, a client of ours in Adelaide, Studiogram, run by Dave and Graham. They had an employee leave their practice, and they obviously needed to replace that person, but they didn't replace like for like. They had the future structure for their studio mapped out, and they had extra salary in their budget. So they knew exactly what they wanted to do in order to build their future structure and keep growing the practice. So having that plan and having the budget really enabled them to do that. So they're able to execute with success. Back to you, Ray.
Thank you, Tim. So now we've spoken about the right people and the right structure. Now we're going to look at the right things in the business. This is what actually happens in the business. And we speak to lots of people. I've got two daughters, and they both got good jobs in universities. And it got to a real habit when on Friday night I would say, "How was your week?" And they would say, "Oh, it's been really busy. Really, well, it's been a busy, hectic week." And we had to stop that because it's quite a meaningless thing to say. Busy, what does that actually mean? Have you had a good week? That's the key. And that comes down to priorities. Have you set the priorities and met the priorities that you want in your practice or your job? And we're amazed how often that busyness substitutes for doing the right work. So this question is really about how do you know what you should be doing, and what are those right things? Do your staff understand what the priorities are in their role? And how do you arrive at those priorities? Too often this is driven by just the work, what's available, we've got to get through the work, or the loudest client shouting, or perhaps some of the deadlines that you've got. And quite often the needs of the business gets forgotten, the monthly invoicing target, getting through work that will make the business efficient, balancing paid work and unpaid work. So we all know that we're working on projects, some of the work is paid and some's not paid because we go above and beyond quite often. And then we've got things like fee proposals, which obviously are unpaid work, but are necessities. So next question is, how do we decide who does what in a practice? Simple question, but really it's often driven by necessity. What's there in front of people? Who's available? And that's not a very efficient way to allocate work. There are really three criteria that we should be looking at. One is we should be using the lowest cost resource. Why would we pay somebody to do a job at a higher rate than we could get a little bit less? It often happens to practice owners who are doing $20 or $30 an hour work when they should be doing $100 an hour work. The second thing is competency. We should be giving work to people who are competent to do the work. So if we give work to people who aren't properly trained, that's going to be inefficient. And the last is quality. So we need to give work to the people who are going to produce the quality that the client wants. So you could have someone who's available, you could have someone who's competent, and your last question is, well, who's going to produce the quality? And that might be the motivated person. It's going to be the person who's going to deliver the best quality is the last tick in the box of the three. And that brings us to big question of delegation, pushing work down in your practice to a level that's appropriate for that piece of work. And that looks like offloading low value work at your level in the business, whether you're the practice owner or an associate, or sometimes even a graduate needs to pass things to the next graduate coming through. Because delegation can be a lot about empowerment, getting people trained and giving them challenging work to do. That keeps people interested, keeps people committed. But when you're delegating, you do really need to remember two things. You need to remember that people make mistakes. So you've got to allow people a little bit of space to make mistakes. If it happens repeatedly, obviously you've got to get on top of that, but don't try to eliminate mistakes completely, because that people get afraid and they stop reaching out and they stop progressing. And the second thing is people do things in different ways. So if you delegate work to someone, don't waste too much time trying to make sure that everyone does it the same way as you. We call it flexibility within a framework. You need to allow people to put their own stamp on their work and not insisting always that things are done in your way. So this is the tool that we use, and we don't have time to go into this in a huge amount of detail, but this is a job, what we call a timed job description. So here we've got the key areas of work. Everyone's got somewhere between 6 and 8 key areas of work, and people have got tasks related to that, to those key areas. What we add, which I think is a big advantage in this type of job description, is we put the percentages of time that we expect people to be doing in the various key areas. And that's often missing from a normal job description. Job description quite often is something that's used at recruitment time and never seen again. So we would encourage you to have job descriptions that do tie into, answer the questions, am I doing the right thing? Well, the first place to go is your job description, because if I'm not following the job description, I'm probably not doing the right things. And we will speak about time management a little bit later, but get a job description that's not stuck in a drawer, but something that's a guide to activity every single day in your practice. So doing the right work, the key takeouts are definitely beware of the busy syndrome. A busy practice is not necessarily an efficient or an effective practice. Manage your priorities. Who's setting their priorities? How are those coming about, and are they in the best interests of the practice and the clients? Definitely delegate appropriately, and we would encourage everybody to use timed job descriptions. Flexibility within a framework, someone's mentioned that. It is a really good phrase. So this is one of my clients, Tim. Tim and his partner, James, were really, we've been in business a long time, but the roles were very unclear. And what happened was that Tim took on the role of effectively CEO or leader of the practice. And it just made a huge difference to the practice. James was happy, Tim was happy, everybody was doing their own role, and there wasn't this conversation about every single decision. So you can see here, Clearly defining my role enabled me to thrive in the practice. And that's the end of that bit.
Thank you. The right way, doing the right things right. So once we have the work organized in the practice, in the studio, and we have people doing the right work, we need to ensure that they're doing that correctly or doing the right things right. And a big part of this comes down to the team itself and the competency of your team, along with managing expectations and ensuring that there's clarity around the expectations on the standard and the delivery of the work when it's being set. Hiring strategically and looking at the future requirements for your studio can help with your team's competency. It's often too late to hire when a large project lands, and we all know that get busy, get help is not a strategy for hiring. Well, maybe we don't all know that, but it's certainly something that we say. Get busy, get help is not a strategy for hiring. Part of the competency question is also ensuring you've got the right people in the right roles in order for them to do their best work. So there may need to be some adjustments in your team in order to best utilize the team's individual strengths. In order for your team to continue performing and doing the right work right, we need to keep developing them and encouraging them along the way. Regular sit downs or check-ins with your team, just a one-on-one coffee, can be a great way to keep your eye on the studio and also align with individually with where your team is at. Holding regular appraisals and providing feedback is also an important way to help continually develop your team. We use a really simple format called start, stop, keep, or some people call it start, stop, continue. It's very easy to use. It provides for excellent conversations and enables you to table issues or successes very, very simply. Doing the right things right is obviously critical, but how do we actually know that they're being done right? So having a sound quality assurance process and knowing that all the work is being checked before it leaves the studio is fundamental really to any studio success. You all work too hard on the projects through the design and concept phase and managing those all important client relationships to let the small mistakes slip through and cause significant damage to the project. Small mistakes can be repaired or redrafted or reissued and the relationship mended, but larger mistakes can really have a lasting impact. So getting the QA process right in place and not skipping it out when there's a big rush or when you don't think you have time to do it properly is all important. We've learned a lot about systemology lately, and we've done some work with a chap called David Jennings. David wrote a book called Systemology, and it's all about systemizing your business or your architectural practice in order to save time, drive efficiency, and reduce dependency on key people. And that includes you as the business owner. It fits very well into ensuring you're doing the right things right. If you do them right once and you document that process, then there's a much better chance that you'll do it right the next time too. This can start with simple things like email templates or briefing documents, or a brief to respond to a client inquiry, for example. Or the systems can be more elaborate, like a new starter video to show an employee how to set up the file server, where things are housed, or where to file work. But generally, having really robust and efficient systems in place is a great way to make sure that you're doing, or your team is doing the right things right. So the key takeouts here for the right way, or doing the right things right, is people have to be doing the right things first, which is really a given. You need to know your team and their capabilities. So that means checking in on them, continually challenging them and having those reviews and appraisals. And the mistakes in architecture on projects are costly. So that's about the QA process and making sure you have that in place and you are ensuring that the things that are being done correctly. One way to sort of do this, I guess, is to you look carefully at the roles you have and make sure you have the people in the right seat. I mentioned earlier, and Jane Mary Lees from Mary Lees Architecture was looking to hire a semi-retired architect. And what that meant was, in order to put a really solid QA process in place, a semi-retired architect, someone who came into the practice maybe just once a week or once a fortnight to check the final documentation, made a big difference in her practice. She didn't have time to check the work. As an owner, you're obviously often running around doing everything. So getting the right person in who had the time and the skills to perform the specific role made a huge impact on the outcome in terms of the output of the studio and the delivery of the work, and also helped to train the rest of your team in delivering on that QA process.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So now we've spoken about the right people, we've spoken about the right structure, we've spoken about making sure that people are doing the right things for their job. We've also spoken about competence and doing things in the right way. So last variable, if you like, is the right time, doing the right amount of those right things right. And time is one of our absolutely key resources within a practice. It is the one resource that we have, and it absolutely needs to be controlled. And it needs to be controlled at a project level and at a practice level. If we get the project bit right, then who says it's all going to come together and at the end of the month, the practice is going to be effective? So our encouragement to everyone is to treat time a little bit like money. There's a great connection between money and time. And if you use time properly, you're going to get the right financial outcomes within your practice. So manage the project from a time and a financial perspective, and manage the whole practice from a time and management perspective. So time really needs to be controlled. It needs to be about job management, about time budgets, making sure that people know how much time they've got for a particular piece of work. And what we find in a lot of architectural practices is they tend to make a split between project hours and non-project hours. But really there's another dimension as well, which is project hours that are going to be paid for, i.e. the project hours that were allocated in the original fee proposal, and project hours that really nobody's going to pay for because you're working on hours that are not included in the fee proposal. So it's really important that we get that clear to everyone. By all means, do the work, but realize that nobody's going to pay for those hours that are not included in the original fee proposal. Moving on, it's really important that we control that the blowouts that happen. And we hear a lot of people in architectural practices speaking about just keeping going till you get it right. You know, we're trying to get a really good outcome. And I think that's what needs to be controlled. And it's probably one of the core factors in architecture as an industry that it is an art and people want to do good design, but that needs to reconcile with running a successful business if you want those three certainties that we spoke about earlier on. And the key is that people have expectations set. Setting expectations is absolutely key. And we do find that expectations can be really a little bit fluid, let's say, within a practice. Everybody's working hard, everybody's busy, therefore it's bound to work out well in the end. And that really, it just doesn't work. So you've got to link to your monthly budget as well. That's every practice should have a monthly budget, not just the outcome of the work. We do the work and then we invoice what we can. Now, there needs to be a budget, and during the month you need to make sure that the work you're doing is creating the value that you want to bill at the end of the month to meet that practice budget that you've got. What we've done is we've developed what we call the golden metric. What we really realized was that architects, when you come right down to it, what they do is they convert hours into money. That's the resource. The resource is hours, the outcome is revenue. So if you divide one by the other, you get a very important metric. Now people say to us, yes, but that's okay, but our revenue is very lumpy and that's really difficult to do. But what I would strongly suggest is that you look at averages over a long period. How many hours did you actually buy in your practice? Take out holidays, take out sickness. Those are the hours that you had, and how much revenue did you create? And if you divide one by the other, that's the golden metric. Average it over 6 months, and you've got an average golden metric. So key takeouts here. Again, time job descriptions, very important when it comes to managing time. People need to know what the right amount of what they should be doing and what makes a good week for them will be if they deliver what's in their, as near as possible, what's in their job description. You need to manage time globally and by project. I need to think about the golden metric. Go back a year and calculate what it was then, see what it is now. You might be surprised at either the improvement or the deterioration. Either way, it's good to know. And here's an example of one of our clients, Beck, chemisters up in Brisbane. She has had 2 goes at business. The first time was she ended up, it speaks about being burned out people. She was very much burned out. The practice wasn't a success. She met Archibiz, she had started again, and she said, I want to try and get it right this time. And she has really improved her practice. She's got lots of clients. She's actually got a waiting list for clients at the moment. And she actually takes a deposit to get people on the waiting list, and people are waiting 6 to 9 months to work with her in the future. So she begins charging more, she's doing really well, and I'll leave Tim to summarize.
Thanks, Ray. So those are the 5 rights of managing and leading people. The right people, the right team, the right structure, as we talked about, is really about the structural thinking for your practice or your business. The right work, which is doing the right things, which is all about priorities. The right way, doing the right things right, which is about competence. And the right time, doing the right amount of the right things right, which relates back primarily to time management. Once you have those 5 rights right, we believe it can have a major impact on the 3 certainties in business. And these are the 3 certainties that, whatever business you're in, but particularly in the architectural practice that you're really looking for. That's a certainty of work or workflow, getting the right projects in the door and having enough work for your studio. The certainty of income, so you have enough income to meet your overheads, to pay your team, to pay yourself, but also to make a profit. And certainty of impact, and that's impact you're having on your immediate team, the impact you're having on the built environment, and also the impact you're having on the community. So there's a lot in there, but get the 5 rights right, and they will help you deliver these 3 certainties. So thank you very much for tuning in and listening and watching Ray and I present the 5 rights. As the conclusion, we are offering a free download of this report, how to get your financial freedom in your practice. I think we'll pop the link for that in the comments section so you can download that. But that'll help you to create a budget. It'll give you strategies to figure out how much you should actually be paying yourself, plus tips for writing and winning fee proposals, tender submissions, and more. So we've got a few minutes left, and we're happy to take some questions. There's plenty of, I'm sure there'll be some questions around those different rights. So feel free to shoot them through.
Thank you. Let me go to the Q&A and grab some questions. The first question we have is, how do you know who is the right people?
Okay, well, maybe
that's a good question.
Take that one to that. I think if there's a balance in getting the right people, I think it's between competence and training and culture and personality. And I think it's really important for the practice to get clear on the culture, and then to hire people who are going to be a fit for that culture in the first instance. It's relatively easy to check qualifications and take references and things. Of course, you need to do all of those things. But the biggest issue we find with people not fitting in is they're just not a cultural fit. And that is hard to assess. There was a previous session that spoke about that and the importance of cultural fit for people joining your practice. You'll get clear on your culture first, and then it becomes much clearer to assess whether an applicant is a fit for that culture or not.
And Lisa here also was talking about a lot of firms get into autopilot mode and don't have this level of strategic thinking behind what they do. What would be some first step that you advise for small firms, especially our audience here today? I think most of them are small firms owner. what can they do to get out of the autopilot mode and start having these strategic conversations?
Well, I can take that one too. The key is what we call board thinking, and Tim spoke about the board, and it's not an oak panelled room with grey-haired people that look a bit like me. It really is that time once a month when you speak about the strategy in the business. So set aside, the first job I would do is put a note in the diary for an hour once a month or an hour and a half on the same day each month, and get that in the calendar. What you speak about in that hour and a half is not important in the first instance. The important thing is to have that meeting. What Archibiz does is provide framework and speed up the process of making that hour or hour and a half effective. We have courses that explain to people how to do that. But that would be my first step, is just think strategically for an hour and a half. You might read a book for an hour and a half, or you might look at the financials in the practice, or you might go through the 5 rights that we've spoken about today. Have we got the right people, structure? Are people clear on priorities? Are people competent in what they want to do? Are people really clear on how to spend their time? And I think if you get those kind of things right, then you are being strategic. The problem is if you don't do that, strategic conversations get spread through the month and become conversations in the corridor or conversations over a coffee, no notes taken, no minutes from the meeting. But if you have that once a month meeting and you look at the key areas of the business, finance, operations, sales and marketing, you take a few actions. What we say is pick 5 actions per month. It might be quite small, and that will be 60 actions over the course of a year, and that will transform your practice.
I love that. Just having small actions and compounding it over time it definitely makes a huge difference. Just check.
That's right. I was just going to say, I think it is all about that sort of incremental change. And as Ray mentioned, having the time, setting the time aside, and even if you are only, you're not going to solve the strategy for your business or plan everything out in that one session or in a couple of tries, but really making those small steps and making them regularly will have that kind of incremental shift on your practice.
Do you recommend? Sorry, I was just asked, do you recommend if it's in those meetings, do you just have the leadership team that comes up with these strategic vision meeting, or would you include the entire team? Let's say it's a small firm to start with.
It's a really good question, and we shouldn't confuse what we would call a management meeting with a board meeting. So really the board meeting effectively represents the shareholders. So it would typically be the owner and a couple of people at most from the practice. If there are 3 partners in the practice or 3 owners, then they would automatically become the board. So it really is about strategy and decision making on behalf of the shareholders rather than the operational side of the business. The problem we find quite often in meeting, people will say, oh, we do have a monthly meeting. But when we sit in on those meetings, we find that they're very much operational and speak about projects. And the benefit of working with somebody like Archibiz is we're not architects, so we can't help you with the day-to-day work, but we can help you make the business better. And that sort of objectivity and detachment from the day-to-day work is really important once a month to do that. That's just on the making things better in small doses. There's a very good book called Atomic Habits, which is really all about that small changes making a big impact on organizations.
Thank you so much. This was really insightful into the business of architecture, and I hope everyone got some insights from it.